Hello students, it's Mrs. Moore and I'm bringing you some weekly enrichment, which means I'm just going to go over a couple short related subjects with you. But before I do that, I've been told that I need to make these videos that I'm creating for you look a little bit more professional because it's just me with a document cam, right? And so I have hired a professional makeup artist. Come here. Okay, yes. Okay, thank you. And I've also hired a professional lighting crew. Yeah, let's get it going. Yeah. Oh, that's too much. Yeah. See how much? That's enough. Go away now. So now I just want you to know that I'm working for you to look good, to be professional. Thank you. Glad to have you on the payroll. Okay.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Okay, off you go. It's bye.
You name it.
Yeah, that's it.
You name
David,
it.
off you go. Thank you. And David,
Borrow my flashlight.
thank you, son. You need
They're for good.
you need to go now.
Sure.
All right, off you go. So, with a little bit of levity there, here's how this is going to work. This is just weekly enrichment. I'm going to go into greater depth in a few subjects that we're already talking about. And then you're going to see attached to the assignment is going to be, please stop whistling. Thank you. Is going to be a quiz, a multiple choice quiz that will be graded the second you do it. It's just easier, quicker work, but it's a way to show that you've actually watched the video. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the impact of the Declaration of Independence. I went over that in great detail for the assignment that you did, in fact, for today, the Declaration of Independence, that is, and we talked about how this made foreign powers more likely to take the colonists seriously. It was a declaration to the world that the people were very happy about it. And so let's talk more directly about the impact of independence. So, passed by the Second Continental Congress on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was not just an expression of philosophy or a cluster of idealistic assertions. It was a tactical document assigned to achieve real and important outcomes in a time of war. So, as I've mentioned, it's theoretical initially, and then it moves to the practical, the exact abuses of King George, the purpose of government, things of that nature. In passing, and it also was hoping to get a certain response from the world in which they lived. In passing the Declaration, the Second Continental Congress hoped to draw Americans closer to the Revolution, to inspire men to enlist in the Continental Army or the various state militias, and to convince still doubtful states that the revolutionary cause was right. So remember that they arranged it, the Congress arranged it so it would be a document that was unanimously passed by some people not being there because they weren't sure. So this is hoping to bring the people together. It also had an international purpose. The Declaration aimed to show foreign nations and potential allies, namely France, that the revolution was being waged by a single united nation, not by 13 small, separate, disconnected colonies, some of whom are still friendly with Britain or attached to them politically. So it's meant to say we are united. At the time it was written, many did not consider the Declaration of Independence of great importance. It seemed just another in the Continental Congress's long stream of declarations and petitions. When Richard Henry Lee stood up, and he is the fellow on July 2nd who made the motion to declare independence, that actually was considered much more significant. So Jefferson wasn't a rock star from the start. Richard Henry Lee's declaration to absolve the ties that connected the Congress with Britain, that was more powerful, more significant. The legendary, almost mythic status the Declaration of Independence enjoys today developed over time. So a reverence for this being the most significant document of the free world, that came over time. It wasn't right after Jefferson wrote it that everyone sang, "Document most holy." Ah! That didn't happen. In 1776, The declaration was viewed as an interesting and well-written resolution of the Continental Congress. After Congress ratified the declaration on July 4th, its official printer, whose name was John Dunlap, he was asked to produce 200 copies. They became known as the Dunlap Broadsides and were distributed among the members of Congress. They in turn passed copies on to state assemblies, committees of safety, and high-ranking officers in the Continental Army. You'll remember when we talked about, I think it's Wentworth Chisholm, that he was a member of the Committee of Safety, that this is kind of a pre-war committee looking out to protect the people, a way to unify people. So, Washington received a copy of the Declaration of Independence on July 6th, and he was impressed by its content. He ordered his men be paraded 3 days later so it could be read aloud to them. Washington stated in general orders that he hoped, and here's a quote, "This important event will serve as a fresh incentive to every officer and soldier to act with fidelity," so faithfulness, courage, "as knowing that now the peace and safety of his country depends under God solely on the success of our arms." So do you see how important this is when you're out there fighting? You're not just fighting for land or money or power, you're fighting for freedom, and that's a big deal. He is now, God is now in the service of our state, possessed of sufficient power to reward his merit. On July 9th, a copy of the Declaration was translated into German and distributed in Pennsylvania, where 1/3 of the population spoke that language, if you've heard Pennsylvania Dutch. By the end of July, the Declaration, or extracts from it, so pieces from the writing, had appeared in more than 30 different newspapers around the colonies. On August 17th, it made its first appearance in a London newspaper. So the question might be, what did the British people themselves think of this? British politicians and theorists penned long-winded responses to the Declaration and its list of charges against the king. The best known of these was a 110-page rebuttal by John Lind. These rebuttals, and a rebuttal is you are protesting against something. You're saying point by point why this is wrong. These rebuttals were ineffective at the time, and even today they are little known. So, something else that we have never talked about, because in history we could talk about so many things, and we have to have a clear narrative, and we can't go down every rabbit hole, but some of the British actually wrote and supported the American cause, most famously Edmund Burke, someone you will begin to know and read his works if you go on to study political science in college perhaps. But he wrote and spoke before the Parliament and said that he thought that the people of the colonies were not being treated fairly or justly. They were being treated too harshly. So not all of the British deserve to be vilified as wanting to oppress the colonists. So, during a September 1776 attempt to negotiate peace, so this is back in the colonies now, so this again, July, August, September, 2 months after the Declaration was published or passed, British commander General Howe, okay, we know him, he demanded that American representatives, including John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, retract the Declaration of Independence. And again, to retract something is to reject it, to say, okay, we're not going to put this before the world. We'll put it back in a shadow somewhere and we won't talk about it again. They refused, and the fighting continued. So even generals were talking about and thinking about this. News of American independence was greeted with amusement and curiosity elsewhere in Europe, with France and Spain gleefully describing it as evidence that British imperial control was failing. So they're delighted to think of the colonists as naughty children and the British as parents who have no control. There's a German word that describes this feeling. It is Schadenfreude, which is when you have a gleeful delight when bad things happen to someone you don't like. And as humans, we are all guilty of it at some point. But just imagine mustache twirling and ha ha ha, intense glee. Let's see. There was little or no serious belief among those powers that an independent America would survive, however. The prevailing view was that the 13 ex-British colonies would, in time, rejoin Britain or align with another European power. That was the thought of the day. So this is going on, okay, we've talked a little bit about how African Americans freed and enslaved blacks, what they thought about the Declaration. And it says, back in America, few African Americans were aware of independence or the text of the Declaration, which is not a surprise considering they were politically marginalized, meaning no one was going to them and saying, have you seen this? What do you think? Join our cause. That wasn't happening. And many were illiterate, as we know from reading about Frederick Douglass. And we know why they were kept illiterate. We understand that that is a way to oppress someone politically and just oppress someone, period. Keep them down. A few who could read noted the irony of its grand statements about liberty and equality. Lemuel Haynes, a 23-year-old biracial man, served in the Massachusetts militia, and he wrote, "Liberty is a jewel which was handed down to man from the cabinet of heaven. He that would take away a man's liberty assumes a prerogative that belongs to another." So the idea that you can't give away your liberty. I query, so I question whether liberty is so contracted a principle as to be confined to any nation under heaven. So is liberty something that only belongs to white people? I don't think so. Even an African has equally as good a right to his liberty in common with Englishmen. And Haynes was not the only individual to turn the idealism of the Declaration against those whose actions contradicted its principles. Slave-turned-philosopher Frederick Douglass and civil rights leader Martin Luther King later referred to Jefferson's words to justify their cause. So you see what a relevant document. What a relevant document. And the theoretical words needed to be stretched to include all people. So too did resistance and liberation movements in other nations, such as Ho Chi Minh in the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence in 1945. So other countries, nearly 200 years later, mentioned the Declaration. It's a very important document. All right, and the next small thing I wanted to talk to you about for this enrichment, which again, it's going to be about half as long as your usual videos, is Baron von Steuben. Okay, he is, if you have watched or listened to the 4th lecture yet, which talks about the effect of the Declaration and when Burgoyne's army then surrenders and we can finally get the French to ally with us, other foreigners of influence get involved on the American side, one of whom, Baron von Steuben, who is a Prussian, so he basically German, and he's going to come and really train the Americans well. So let's hear a little bit about him. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, better known as Baron von Steuben, who lived from 1730 to 1794, was a Prussian military officer who contributed to the training of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. He was born in Magdeburg, the son of a Prussian military officer, and educated in Germany and Russia. He enlisted in the Prussian army at age 17 and later obtained a commission as an infantry officer. Steuben served as an aide to the Prussian ruler Frederick the Great. Wow, that's a pretty good pedigree. Then saw service in the 7 Years' War, reaching the rank of captain. So remember what Europe calls the 7 Years' War. In America, that's the French and Indian War. So think of him coming up through the ranks just as Washington was. He retired from the army in 1764 and took the position of a chamberlain, which is a household manager, to a Prussian prince. That would be kind of a dull life after you've been in the military, I would think. Steuben held this position for more than a decade. However, it left him in great debt and forced him to consider a return to military ideas, so he needed money. After unsuccessful attempts to obtain a military post in Europe, Steuben learned of the unfolding war in North America. In the spring of 1777, he met with Benjamin Franklin and Silas Deane in Paris. So Franklin out there getting people interested. Remember, it is not as if, Baron von Steuben turned on the news one day and said, "Great general needed. So you have to find out, you have to be connected. Steuben then arrived in America in December of 1777, and the following February volunteered his service to Congress, which dispatched him immediately to the Continental Army's winter camp at Valley Forge. And again, the long, cold, miserable winter that Washington and his men spend. Despite his inability to speak English, Steuben set about educating the Americans in European-style warfare. So imagine, they had to communicate through body language, things like that. Continental infantrymen were taught everything from basic camp procedures to bayonet use, while officers were trained in battlefield command and strategy. Steuben's contributions helped forge the Continental Army into a more coordinated and disciplined unit. His famous Blue Book, Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States, which was published in 1779, provided the basis for American military training for 2 decades after Steuben's death. So think they would have been using that during the War of 1812. While Steuben is best known as the Continental Army's Inspector General, he also saw combat in the Southern theater of the Revolutionary War, commanding regiments at Monmouth and Yorktown. He was given American citizenship in March 1783 and discharged from the Army in March 1784. Congress awarded him a large land grant in central New York State and a sizable pension, so retirement. Though Steuben, like other officers, would have to wait years to receive them. The government didn't have much money, right? Especially after war. He lived out his final years as a bachelor, one of these perpetual, always bachelors, on his farm and in New York City. So, the reason I wanted to share that with you is sometimes, I think in history, we like to know those small details of how things happen. You hear something like, this army needed training, and then here comes this great German guy, and you never know the details of, well, how did that happen exactly? Maybe the more mundane aspects of history, but everyday life needs mundane things to happen for exciting and great things to happen, right? Okay, well, my lighting crew and my makeup crew seem to have left, but I hope you all are having a great day, and I look forward to talking with you again soon. Toodaloo!